The stranger in the storm. The wind howled through the dense forest, bending trees as if they were mere twigs. Rain poured in relentless sheets, drowning the faint sounds of nocturnal creatures. David Reynolds pulled his jacket tighter around him as he trudged along the muddy trail. He had lived alone in the forest for years, away from the noise of the city. The silence and isolation suited him, until tonight. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow path ahead. He was halfway home when he saw it, a faint glimmer, something unusual lying in the middle of the trail. At first, he thought it was a trick of the rain. But as he stepped closer, he realized it was a person. "Hey," he called out, his voice swallowed by the storm. The figure didn't move. David knelt beside her, his heart racing. She was a woman, barely conscious, her pale skin almost glowing under the dim light. Her clothes were strange, silvery and smooth, like nothing he'd ever seen before. Her hair clung to her face, wet and tangled, and there was something odd about her, a faint hum, like a low-frequency vibration coming from her body. "Are you okay?" David asked, shaking her gently. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then he noticed her wounds, small gashes along her arms and legs that shimmered unnaturally. They weren't bleeding like normal cuts. Instead, the edges glowed faintly, almost as if they were trying to heal themselves. David hesitated. Every instinct told him to walk away. This wasn't normal. But he couldn't leave her here to die. With a deep breath, he slid his arms under her, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than she looked, and her skin was ice-cold, like she'd been lying in a freezer. The strange humming grew louder as he carried her. "Hang on," he muttered. "I'll get you out of this storm." The trek back to his cabin was slow and grueling. The rain soaked him to the bone, and the mud threatened to pull his boots off with every step. But he kept going, glancing down at the woman every few minutes to make sure she was still breathing. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, glowing faintly in the darkness, before closing again. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. By the time he reached the cabin, his muscles were screaming. He kicked the door open and laid her gently on the old couch near the fireplace. The room was dark, but the faint glow from her body lit up her features. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, but there was something unsettling about her presence. David quickly lit a fire, the warmth slowly filling the small cabin. He grabbed a blanket and draped it over her, hoping it would help with the cold. She stirred slightly, murmuring words in a language he didn't recognize. They sounded melodic but urgent, like a warning. "What are you saying?" he asked softly, even though he knew she couldn't understand him. He studied her for a moment, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And what was she doing in the middle of the forest during a storm like this? David grabbed his first aid kit, though he wasn't sure it would help. Her wounds didn't look like anything he'd seen before. As he reached for her arm, a sudden jolt of energy shot through his fingers, making him yelp. The glow around her wounds pulsed, almost as if it was alive. "What the hell?" he muttered, staring at his hand. There was no burn or injury, but he felt an odd tingling sensation, like static electricity. The woman's breathing grew steadier, and her eyes opened again. This time, she looked directly at him. Her gaze was piercing, her glowing eyes filled with fear and desperation. She grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but clear enough to send shivers down his spine. David froze. "Who's coming?" She didn't answer. Her head fell back, her eyes closing once more. Outside, the storm raged on, but David's focus was entirely on the mysterious woman lying in his cabin. He didn't know what he had just gotten himself into, but he had a feeling his quiet life was about to change forever. As the fire crackled and the rain pounded against the roof, David sat back, his mind racing. He had to decide what to do next. Should he call for help? But who would believe him? And what if someone dangerous really was coming for her? For now, all he could do was wait. Wait for her to wake up, wait for answers, and hope that whoever was coming wouldn't find them first. A chase across the stars. The sound of an engine roaring to life jolted David awake. He sat up on the old couch, blinking at the sight before him. The woman, who had been unconscious just hours ago, was now on her feet, her silvery clothes shimmering faintly in the dim light of the cabin. Her eyes were sharp and focused, scanning the room like a cornered animal. "Hey, you shouldn't be moving," David said, stepping toward her. She spun around, and for a moment her glowing eyes locked onto his. "You need to leave this place. They're already here," she said, her voice steady but urgent. David frowned. "Who's they? What are you talking about?" Before she could answer, a deafening boom echoed outside, shaking the cabin to its foundation. David rushed to the window, his heart pounding. Through the rain, he saw a strange, sleek craft hovering just beyond the trees. It wasn't like anything he'd ever seen before, dark, angular, and humming with an eerie light. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, backing away from the window. "They found me," the woman said, her voice low but resolute. "And now they'll come for you too." David turned to her, his frustration boiling over. "Listen, I don't know who you are or what's going on, but I didn't sign up for this." She didn't respond. Instead, she moved with surprising speed, pulling a hidden panel from the wall. David's jaw dropped as the panel slid back to reveal a glowing console embedded in the wood. "What is that?" he demanded. "It's my ship," she said simply, her fingers dancing across the alien controls. "I buried it here months ago. It was supposed to be my last hiding place." "Your ship?" David's mind reeled. "You're telling me you're Anne?" Another explosion cut him off. This time, it was closer. The cabin door rattled on its hinges, and the lights flickered. David's survival instincts kicked in. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast," he said, grabbing an old hunting rifle from the corner. Not that he thought it would help much against whatever was out there. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. "There's no time to explain. If you stay, you die. Come with me." David hesitated. He didn't know this woman. For all he knew, she could be dangerous, or worse, leading him into something even worse than what was outside. But the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the cabin made the decision for him. "Fine," he said, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. "But if this is a trap, I'm not going down without a fight." The woman gave him a fleeting, almost grateful smile. She pressed a final button, and the floor beneath the cabin trembled. A section of the room slid open, revealing a sleek, silver craft nestled in an underground chamber. It was small, just big enough for two, but it looked more advanced than anything David had ever seen. "Get in," she said, already climbing into the cockpit. David didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled in after her, the hum of the craft's engines growing louder as the hatch sealed shut behind them. The interior was smooth and metallic, with glowing symbols on the walls that he couldn't begin to understand. "Hold on," she warned. The ship shot upward with a sudden burst of energy, breaking through the roof of the cabin like it was made of paper. David barely had time to react before they were hurtling through the storm, the ground below vanishing into darkness. "What's your name?" he shouted over the hum of the engines. "Area," she replied, her hand steady on the controls. "And yours?" "David," he said, gripping the edge of his seat. "What's going on, Area? Who's after you?" Her face hardened. "Rebels. They destroyed my family. They want to finish what they started." David didn't have time to process her words before the ship jolted violently. Alarms blared, and the view outside the cockpit lit up with flashes of light. Two dark, angular crafts were closing in fast, firing bursts of energy that shook their ship. "They're trying to disable us," Area shouted, her hands flying across the controls. "What do we do?" David asked, panic creeping into his voice. Aria's expression was grim but determined. "We fight." David stared at her in disbelief. "Fight? With what?" Aria didn't answer. Instead, she flipped a series of switches, and the entire ship seemed to hum with new energy. Panels on either side of the cockpit lit up, displaying symbols David couldn't read. A holographic targeting system appeared before her, locking onto the enemy ships. "Hold on to something," she said again, her voice calm and steady. The next few moments were a blur. The ship moved like a living thing, dodging enemy fire with impossible precision. Aria's hands were a blur on the controls, and David clung to his seat, trying not to lose his mind. As one of the enemy ships closed in, Aria fired a burst of energy that ripped through its hull. The craft exploded in a brilliant flash, sending debris hurtling into the storm. David let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "You're insane," he muttered. "I'm alive," Aria shot back. "And so are you." The second enemy ship pulled back, disappearing into the storm. For now, they were safe. But as Aria guided the ship through the clouds and into the vast expanse of space, David couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To a place they won't find us," she said, her voice heavy with determination. "And to figure out how to end this." David glanced out the window, the earth shrinking behind them. He didn't know what he'd just gotten himself into, but one thing was clear: his life would never be the same. Secrets of the Princess. The silence of space was unnerving. David sat in the co-pilot's seat, staring out the window as stars blurred into streaks of light. Aria's ship was running on autopilot, gliding smoothly through the void. For the first time since this chaos began, there was no storm, no explosions, no immediate danger, just an uneasy quiet. "Where are we going?" David asked, breaking the silence. Aria didn't look at him. Her focus remained on a holographic map projected from the console. "Far enough that they can't track us. We need time to repair the ship and regroup." David frowned. "Regroup for what? I don't even know what's going on." "You show up in the middle of the forest with glowing moons, strange powers, and people trying to kill you. And now I'm in space. I think I deserve some answers." She hesitated, her fingers pausing over the controls. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the ship's engine. "I didn't want to involve you," she said finally. "But you saved me. You gave me a chance to escape. I owe you the truth." David leaned back, crossing his arms. "Start talking." Aria turned her chair to face him, her glowing eyes softening. "I'm not from your planet. I come from a world called Elindra. Far from here. My family ruled there for generations, peacefully, until the uprising. A group of rebels overthrew my family, killed most of them, and took control. I barely escaped." David stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You're telling me you're royalty, like an alien princess?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "The title doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm the last of my line. As long as I live, the rebels will never feel secure. That's why they're hunting me." David shook his head, laughing nervously. "This is insane. I mean, it's not every day you find out you're sitting next to royalty from another planet." Her expression didn't change. "This isn't a joke, David. If they catch me, they'll kill me. And anyone who helps me. That includes you." His laughter died instantly. He looked at her, seeing the weight in her glowing eyes, the exhaustion etched into her features. She wasn't lying. "Why Earth?" he asked after a long pause. "Why hide on my planet?" "Because it's far enough from Elindra that they couldn't reach me easily. Or so I thought." She sighed, leaning back in her seat. "The rebels have more resources than I realized. They've tracked me across galaxies." David ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "Okay, so you're being hunted by alien rebels. But what's your plan? You can't run forever." Aria's gaze darkened. "I'm not running anymore. I have something they fear. a key to their defeat. But it's not enough on its own. I need to find allies, rebuild what my family lost. David's curiosity piqued. What kind of key? She hesitated, as if debating whether to tell him. Finally, she stood and walked to the back of the cockpit. She returned moments later with a small metallic device in her hand. It was no bigger than a deck of cards, but its surface shimmered with a strange, otherworldly light. "This," she said, holding it out for him to see. "It's a fragment of an ancient Elindran artifact. My family used it to govern peacefully for centuries. The rebels destroyed most of it, but this piece contains enough power to destabilize their regime, if used correctly." David leaned closer, studying the device. "What does it do?" "It controls energy. On Elindra, energy isn't just power, it's life. With this fragment, I can undo the damage the rebels have done, but it requires a specific alignment to work. Without the rest of the artifact, it's incomplete." David let out a low whistle. "So that's why they want you dead. If you use this, they're finished." She nodded. "Exactly. But finding the right conditions to activate it isn't easy, and every moment we spend looking gives them more time to hunt us." A sudden beeping from the console interrupted their conversation. Aria's eyes darted to the screen, and her expression grew tense. "They found us." David felt a surge of adrenaline. "How? I thought you said we were far enough away." "They must have planted a tracker on the ship during the last attack." Her fingers flew across the controls, shutting down non-essential systems. "Hold on, I'm taking us off the hyperlane." The ship jolted violently as Aria veered it out of faster-than-light travel. David gripped the edges of his seat, his heart pounding. Through the viewport, he saw a vast asteroid field looming ahead. "An asteroid field?" he asked, his voice rising. "That's your plan?" Aria's jaw tightened. "They won't follow us in here. It's too dangerous." "Great," David muttered. "And we're not in danger at all, right?" Aria didn't respond. She focused entirely on maneuvering the ship through the jagged rocks, her movements precise and calculated. David watched as the enemy ships appeared on the radar, closing in fast. "Can't this thing go any faster?" he asked. "Not in this condition," she replied. "The ship's barely holding together as it is." The tension in the cockpit was palpable as the first enemy ship entered the asteroid field. It fired a burst of energy, narrowly missing them. Aria's ship weaved through the floating rocks, using the terrain as cover. David's knuckles turned white as he gripped his seat. "Remind me to never leave Earth again." Aria allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. "If we survive, I'll let you yell at me as much as you want." The ship jolted as another blast grazed their shields. Aria pushed the controls harder, her glowing eyes narrowing with focus. As the second enemy ship closed in, David realized something. He wasn't just running from danger anymore. He was part of something bigger. And for better or worse, he was in this fight now. The trap. The moon loomed large and pale beneath them, its cracked surface glowing faintly in the light of distant stars. Aria's ship descended cautiously, skimming over jagged craters and fields of glittering alien minerals. David sat in the co-pilot's seat, his nerves on edge as the ship rattled from the strain of their desperate escape. "We'll land here," Aria said, her voice steady despite the tension. "This moon has enough atmospheric interference to mask our signal." David glanced at her. "And what happens if they track us anyway?" "They won't," she replied firmly. "They're arrogant. They'll assume we're too damaged to survive." David wasn't convinced, but he didn't argue. The ship touched down on a flat, rocky plateau surrounded by jagged cliffs. Aria powered down the engines, and for a moment, the silence felt almost peaceful. But David knew better. This wasn't peace. This was the calm before the storm. "All right," he said, unbuckling his harness. "What's the plan?" Aria stood and opened a compartment on the wall, pulling out a sleek metallic tool that looked like a cross between a wrench and a laser. The shift shield generator was damaged during the last attack. Without it, We won't survive another encounter. David raised an eyebrow. You're going to fix it. Out here. She gave him a small, determined smile. I've repaired this ship before. It's not the first time it's been through worse. He admired her confidence, but his instincts told him something wasn't right. The moon was too quiet, too still. Fine, he said, grabbing his rifle and slinging it over his shoulder. But I'm coming with you. Arya hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Stay close. The two of them stepped out into the moon's eerie landscape. The air was thin but breathable, tinged with the metallic scent of the minerals scattered across the ground. Every step crunched against the rocky terrain, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. Arya moved quickly, scanning the ship's hull with her tool. David kept watch, his eyes darting across the landscape for any sign of movement. The cliffs around them cast long, jagged shadows, and the faint hum of the atmosphere made his skin crawl. "Do you hear that?" he asked, gripping his rifle tighter. Arya glanced up from her work. "What?" "That humming," David said. It's coming from everywhere." She frowned, her glowing eyes narrowing. "It's just the atmosphere. This moon is rich in energy minerals. They vibrate naturally." David nodded, but the uneasy feeling in his gut didn't go away. He scanned the cliffs again, and that's when he saw it, a flicker of movement, too quick to be natural. "Arya," he said sharply, "we're not alone." She froze, her hand hovering over the ship's damaged panel. "Where?" David pointed toward the cliffs. "There. Something's watching us." Arya's expression darkened. "We need to leave. Now." Before they could react, a voice echoed from the shadows, smooth and mocking. "Going somewhere, princess." David spun around, aiming his rifle. Figures emerged from the cliffs, their forms sleek and intimidating. They wore dark, angular armor that shimmered faintly, blending with the environment. Their leader stepped forward, a tall figure with a cruel smile and eyes that glinted with malice. "Rebels," Arya muttered, her voice cold. The leader chuckled. "You've led us on quite the chase, Arya. Did you really think you could hide forever?" David tightened his grip on the rifle. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." The rebel leader smirked. How noble, but pointless. In one swift motion, the rebels raised their weapons, sleek, alien devices that glowed with ominous energy. David fired first, but his shots ricocheted harmlessly off their shields. "David, get down," Arya shouted. He dove to the ground as she raised her hand. A burst of energy erupted from her palm, slamming into the rebels and sending them stumbling back. The glow in her eyes intensified, her power surging like a storm barely contained. The rebels recovered quickly, their leader barking orders. "Take her alive. Kill the human." David scrambled to his feet, firing wildly to cover Arya as she unleashed another wave of energy. Despite her strength, the rebels pressed closer, their movements coordinated and relentless. "We can't hold them off," David shouted. "We need a plan." Arya gritted her teeth, her energy faltering. "There's no time. Get back to the ship. I'll hold them here." "No way," David yelled. "I'm not leaving you." Before she could argue, a new sound cut through the chaos, a high-pitched whine that grew louder by the second. The rebels hesitated, glancing toward the source of the noise. From over the horizon, a lone scavenger ship descended, its lights blinding and its engines roaring. It was old and battered, but its sudden arrival threw the rebels into disarray. The scavenger's voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "Need a hand." David and Arya exchanged a stunned look before seizing the opportunity. "Move," Arya shouted, pulling David toward their ship as the scavenger opened fire on the rebels, scattering them. They dove into the cockpit, and Arya powered up the engines in record time. As the ship lifted off, David glanced back at the scavenger, who was still fending off the rebels. "Why would he help us?" David asked. Arya's expression was grim. "I don't know, but we'll find out soon enough." As they soared into the sky, leaving the moon and the rebels behind, David couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected ally might be just as dangerous as their enemies. Betrayal and trust. The scavenger's ship was barely holding together. Its hull was patched with mismatched panels, and its engine sputtered like an ancient relic. Yet it had saved their lives, and now it floated alongside Aria's ship in the vast emptiness of space. David crossed his arms, watching the docking bay console with suspicion. Are we sure about this? He could be leading us into another trap. Aria's glowing eyes narrowed as she stared at the approaching vessel. He helped us escape. That doesn't mean we can trust him. The scavenger's voice crackled over the comm system, rough but friendly. Relax, princess. If I wanted to sell you out, I wouldn't have blasted the rebels to save your skin. Let me aboard, and I'll help you fix that hunk of junk you're flying. David frowned. Did he just call your ship junk? Aria sighed. He's not entirely wrong. The shield generator is barely functional, and our weapons are depleted. David looked at her, his voice low. And you think he can fix that? Aria hesitated, then pressed a button on the console. Docking bay is open. Let's find out. A few minutes later, the scavenger stepped aboard, and David's first impression wasn't great. He was tall and wiry, his clothes patched with scraps of fabric and metal. His face was hidden behind a visor that flickered with data readouts, and his belt bristled with tools and gadgets. Name's Kex, he said, pulling off the visor to reveal sharp, calculating eyes. And you must be the infamous Aria of Elindra. Aria stiffened. How do you know who I am? Kex smirked. You're a hot topic in certain circles. Royalty on the run, rebels in pursuit, and a fragment of Elindra's most powerful artifact. You're practically a legend. David stepped between them, gripping his rifle. If you know so much, you know why we don't trust you. Kex raised his hands in mock surrender. Easy there, hero. I'm not looking for trouble. I'm looking for opportunity. Fixing your ship gets me paid. Paid, David echoed, his skepticism growing. Aria cut in. What do you want? Kex's grin widened. I need safe passage through rebel territory. Word is, you're the only one who can pull that off. David snorted. And why would we help you? Because, Kex said, pointing at the flickering console, without me, your ship doesn't last another fight. I can fix your shields, upgrade your weapons, and get you off every rebel radar in the sector. Deal. Aria studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. Fine. But if you betray us, you'll blast me into stardust. Kex finished, smirking. I've heard that one before. Now, let me work my magic. Hours passed as Kex tinkered with the ship's systems, his movements quick and precise. David watched him like a hawk, his gut telling him something was off. Meanwhile, Aria sat in the cockpit, her eyes scanning for any signs of the rebels. David finally broke the tense silence. Do you really think he's helping us out of the kindness of his heart? Aria didn't look up. No, but that doesn't mean he won't keep his word. For now. And when he doesn't. She glanced at him, her glowing eyes steady. We'll be ready. Their conversation was cut short by a sudden flicker on the radar. A small blip appeared, moving fast and heading straight for them. Rebels? David asked, gripping the edge of his seat. Aria frowned. No, it's too small. It's a beacon. David's blood ran cold. A tracking beacon. Aria nodded grimly. Kex. David stormed into the engine room, where Kex was hunched over a panel. What the hell did you do? David barked, pointing his rifle at him. Kex raised an eyebrow, unfazed. Relax, hero. I didn't do anything. Then explain the tracking beacon heading right for us, David interrupted. Kex froze for a split second, just long enough for David to notice. Okay, so maybe I had to tip off a contact to cover my tracks. No big deal. Aria appeared in the doorway, her expression colder than the void outside. You betrayed us. Kex held up his hands. It's just business. I didn't think they'd show up so fast. David moved closer, his voice low and dangerous. You just put a target on all of us. Before Kex could reply, the ship rocked violently. Alarms blared as energy blasts rattled the hull. Aria rushed to the controls, her hands flying over the panels. 2 ships, closing fast. She called out. They're locking weapons. David turned to Kex. If we get out of this, I'm throwing you out the airlock. Kex grinned nervously. Fair enough. But first, let me show you what I installed. He darted to the console and pressed a button. The ship's shields roared to life, stronger and brighter than before. Enhanced shielding, Kex said smugly. You're welcome. Aria didn't waste a second, piloting the ship with precision as David manned the weapons. The rebels weren't expecting the sudden upgrade. Aria's ship darted between their attacks, and David's well-placed shots disabled one of the enemy crafts. The second ship retreated, its engines sparking from a near miss. The cockpit fell silent again, save for the hum of the ship's systems. David turned to Kex, his grip on the rifle tightening. Why shouldn't I shoot you right now? Kex shrugged, a sheepish grin on his face. Because I just saved your royal friend's life. Twice. Aria stepped forward, her voice calm but icy. The next time you betray me, I won't let you explain. Understand? Kex nodded quickly, crystal clear. As the tension eased slightly, David couldn't help but feel they hadn't seen the last of Kex's tricks. For now, they had survived. But trust, it seemed, was still a dangerous gamble. The Princess awakens. The ship's interior was dimly lit, the hum of its engines the only sound as it drifted through the void. Aria sat cross-legged on the floor of the cockpit, her head bowed, her breathing steady but strained. Her hands glowed faintly, a soft pulsating light radiating from her fingertips. David leaned against the doorway, watching her. What are you doing? He asked, breaking the silence. Focusing, she replied without opening her eyes. Preparing. For what? Another betrayal from Kex. Aria opened her eyes and met his gaze. Her glowing irises were brighter than before, a mix of determination and something else, something ancient and powerful. No, she said. For them. David frowned. The rebels. We outran them. For now. Aria shook her head. They won't stop. They never stop. And if they corner us again, I need to be ready. David stepped into the room, crossing his arms. You've been holding back, haven't you? I've seen what you can do. Those energy blasts. The way you took out those rebels. But it's more than that, isn't it? She hesitated, then nodded. What you've seen is only a fraction of my power. It's complicated. Complicated how? Aria stood, her movements graceful but deliberate. The energy I use isn't just a weapon. It's a part of me. It's tied to Elindra, to my people. It's powerful, but it's also dangerous. If I use too much of it, I could lose control. David's eyes widened. Lose control? As in destroy everything around me, she said softly. Including you. David let out a low whistle. No pressure, then. Aria's lips twitched in a faint smile. That's why I've been careful. But careful isn't enough anymore. If I don't use my full strength, we won't survive what's coming. David studied her for a moment, his skepticism giving way to something else. Admiration. She wasn't just powerful. She was brave, willing to carry the weight of her abilities despite the risks. All right, he said. So how do we make sure you don't lose control? Her expression grew serious. You can't. Only I can do that. And it means trusting myself in ways I haven't dared to before. The calm didn't last. Hours later, the ship's alarms blared, jolting David from a restless nap. He stumbled into the cockpit to find Aria and Kex already at the controls. What now? David asked, his voice groggy but alert. Kex gestured to the radar. Rebel flagship, heading straight for us. And they brought friends. David leaned over Aria's shoulder, his stomach sinking at the sight of the massive blips on the screen. That's a lot of friends. Aria's jaw tightened. They must have been waiting for us to make a move. We can't outrun them this time. Kex grinned nervously. Good thing I upgraded your shields, huh? David shot him a glare. Unless you install the cloaking device or a secret fleet of our own, I don't think shields are going to cut it. Aria stood abruptly, her glowing eyes brighter than ever. No, but I can. Both men stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? David asked. She turned to face them, her expression calm but resolute. I'm going to face them. Kex let out a laugh, more nervous than amused. What? You're going to take on a flagship by yourself. Good luck with that, princess. David stepped closer to her, lowering his voice. Aria, this is insane. You said it yourself. If you use too much power, you could lose control. She met his gaze, her voice steady. And if I don't, we all die. I can handle this, David. I have to. David hesitated. Every instinct told him to stop her, to keep her safe. But the determination in her eyes left no room for doubt. She wasn't just doing this for herself. She was doing it for all of them. All right, he said finally. But I'm coming with you. Her eyes softened. You can't. If something goes wrong. If something goes wrong, you're going to need someone to bring you back, David interrupted. I'm not letting you do this alone. Aria didn't argue. Instead, she nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing her face. Then let's go. The battle was unlike anything David had ever experienced. The flagship loomed ahead, its cannons firing relentless volleys of energy. Smaller rebel ships swarmed like predators, their sleek forms darting through the chaos. Aria stood at the heart of the ship's bridge, her hands glowing with an intensity that made David's skin crawl. She raised her arms, and a wave of energy erupted from her, forming a shimmering barrier that absorbed the enemy fire. David manned the weapons console, his fingers flying over the controls. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Aria's voice was strained but steady. I can hold them off, but not for long. You need to disable their engines. David gritted his teeth, working on it. As the rebels closed in, Aria unleashed another wave of energy, her power growing brighter and more volatile. David could feel the heat radiating from her, the sheer force of her presence almost overwhelming. Aria, he shouted, you're pushing too hard. I know, she replied, her voice filled with both determination and fear. But it's the only way. The ship jolted violently as a direct hit rocked their shields. David struggled to stay upright, his eyes darting between the controls and Aria. Her glow was blinding now, her energy surging to a level that seemed impossible to contain. And then, with a final, deafening roar, she let it all go. The flagship's engines exploded in a brilliant cascade of light, sending the smaller rebel ships scattering. The battlefield fell silent, the rebels retreating into the void. David turned to Aria, his heart pounding. She stood in the center of the room, her glow fading, her body trembling. He rushed to her side, catching her as she collapsed. You did it, he said, his voice filled with awe. She looked up at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but still glowing faintly. We did it. As the ship drifted in the aftermath of the battle, David realized something. Aria wasn't just a princess. She was a force of nature. And for better or worse, he was now part of her story. Sacrifice and freedom. The rebel fleet had retreated, but their flagship loomed on the radar, a silent threat in the vastness of space. Inside Aria's ship, the tension was thick. Every system was battered, the lights flickered weakly, and the air felt heavy with the weight of the decisions ahead. Aria stood at the console, her eyes fixed on the holographic display of the rebel flagship. Her glow had dimmed, but her presence remained resolute, unyielding. David leaned against the wall, his rifle slung over his shoulder, watching her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "They're regrouping," David said, breaking the silence. "We bought ourselves some time, but not much." Arya nodded. "They'll come back stronger. The next time, they won't leave until one of us is destroyed." Kex, sitting cross-legged on the floor and tinkering with a handheld device, let out a nervous laugh. "You know, I didn't sign up for a suicide mission. Just putting that out there." David shot him a glare. "You're free to leave any time, Kex." Kex grinned, though it didn't reach his eyes, and missed the grand final. Not a chance. Arya turned to face them, her expression somber. "This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about ending this once and for all." David stepped closer. "What's the plan?" She took a deep breath, the faint glow in her eyes flickering. "The artifact fragment I carry, it's not just a key to Elindra's future. It's also a weapon. If I activate it at full power, it will create an energy surge strong enough to destroy the flagship and any rebel forces nearby." David frowned. "That sounds promising. What's the catch?" Arya hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "The surge will burn me out. My energy is tied to the artifact. Using it at that level would end me." The room fell silent. David stared at her, his mind racing. "No," he said finally. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Arya said softly. "This is what I was meant to do. It's the only way to ensure the rebels can't hurt anyone else." David shook his head, his voice rising. "You're just going to throw your life away. After everything we've been through. After everything you fought for." Arya's eyes met his, filled with a quiet resolve. "Sometimes, the only way to protect the future is to sacrifice the present." The plan was set. Arya would approach the rebel flagship under the guise of surrender, drawing their forces close enough to ensure the energy surge would destroy them all. David and Kex would escape in a scavenged escape pod, far enough away to avoid the blast. But as the moments ticked down, David couldn't shake the sinking feeling in his chest. He couldn't let this happen, not without a fight. "You're making a mistake," he said, standing in the cockpit as Arya prepared the ship for its final journey. She didn't look at him. "It's my choice to make." "Arya," David said, his voice softer now. "You're more than just a weapon. You're more than a sacrifice. There has to be another way." She turned to him, her glowing eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I wish there was. But my people are gone, David. My family is gone. If I don't do this, everything they fought for will be lost." David stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." For a moment, the walls Arya had built around herself seemed to crumble. But then she straightened, her resolve hardening once more. "I appreciate everything you've done, David, but this is goodbye." The rebel flagship loomed ahead, its massive form blotting out the stars. Arya's ship approached slowly, its weapons powered down to sell the illusion of surrender. David and Kex sat in the escape pod, waiting for the moment they would be ejected. David's fists clenched as he watched Arya on the small monitor. She was calm, composed, and utterly determined, but he couldn't let her do this. At the last second, he made his move. "Sorry, Kex," he muttered, hitting the override switch and locking the pod's controls. "Hey, what are you?" Kex's protests were cut off as David scrambled back into the main ship. Arya whirled around as he entered the cockpit. "David, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the controls, pulling the ship into a sharp dive. The flagship's weapons fired, but he weaved through the blasts with surprising skill. "David," Arya shouted, grabbing his arm, "you're ruining everything." "No," he said, his jaw set. "I'm saving you." The ship shuddered as it dodged another volley. Arya's eyes flared with anger, but beneath it, there was something else. Fear. Not for herself, but for him. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "If I don't stop them, they'll destroy everything. Then we'll stop them together, David said firmly. But I'm not letting you die for this. In the end, it wasn't Arya's plan or David's defiance that turned the tide. It was their unity. Arya unleashed her power, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a shield, channeling the artifact's energy to disable the flagship's systems without destroying herself. David piloted with unrelenting focus, outmaneuvering the rebels at every turn. Together, they crippled the flagship, forcing its retreat. The rebels had been defeated, at least for now. As the battle ended, the cockpit fell silent. Arya sat in her chair, her glow dim but steady. David looked at her, his chest heaving with exhaustion. "You didn't have to do this alone," he said softly. She met his gaze, a small, tired smile playing on her lips. "I see that now." As the stars stretched out before them, David realized something. This wasn't just the end of Arya's fight. It was the beginning of something new. Chance to rebuild, to hope, and to forge a future together.